You're tuning into the deep dive, and today we're grappling with something that sounds a bit like a Zen koan, doesn't it? Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form.
It really does. And for you, our listener, this isn't just some philosophical puzzle. It's actually a core idea in Buddhism, especially the Mahayana tradition.
Exactly. And it's famously from the Heart Sutra, the Prajnaparamita, which is quite a mouthful.
It is. It means the heart of the perfection of wisdom. And yeah, despite the long name, the text itself is incredibly concise.
So our mission today in this deep dive is to unpack that line. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. We want to look at, where it came from, what it means.
How people interpret it, maybe some surprising links to things like modern physics.
Oh, definitely. And also how it might actually apply in, day-to-day life. Plus, we'll touch on some critiques or different takes on it.
Right. We're aiming to give you a good, solid understanding without hopefully getting too bogged down in overly academic stuff. We've been looking at a document called Form, Emptiness, and Experience, and also several web articles on the Heart Sutra and this whole concept of emptiness.
Okay, great. So let's dive right in. This line, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Where does it actually sit within the Heart Sutra?
Well, it's pretty much the core statement. As you said, the Sanskrit name points to praja, wisdom. And in Mahayana Buddhism, this kind of wisdom is seen as, essential. It's key to liberation from suffering, from what they call samsara.
And the text itself, it goes way back, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's part of the Prajnaparamita literature, this larger body of texts. They think these started appearing around maybe the time of Jesus Christ or possibly even earlier. So the Heart Sutra is one of the earliest Mahayana texts we have.
Wow, that's ancient.
It really is. And there's even some scholarly debate about its exact origin. Edward Conze, a major scholar, put it around 350 CE. But others, like John Nattier, have suggested maybe it originated in China, not India.
Interesting. The fact they still debate it.
It kind of highlights how significant and maybe adaptable this wisdom is, right? That it could resonate across cultures like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So inside the sutra, who's actually saying this stuff? Who's talking?
The dialogue is between Avalokiteshvara, who is the bodhisattva of compassion, sort of the embodiment of perfect wisdom, and Shariputra, who is one of the Buddha's sharpest disciples. Shariputra is basically asking Avalokiteshvara for instruction on this perfection of wisdom.
Wow, so you've got compassion and wisdom right there in the conversation itself.
Exactly. That pairing is crucial. It suggests that understanding form and emptiness isn't just, an intellectual thing. It's tied deeply to both wisdom and compassion, like two wings of a bird on the path to enlightenment.
And presenting it as a dialogue makes it feel more accessible.
I think so. Less like a commandment, more like an exploration in response to a genuine question.
And this Heart Sutra, it's not some dusty, forgotten text, is it?
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's probably the most frequently used, most recited text in the entire Mahayana tradition. I mean, there are exceptions like Shin or Nichiren Buddhists, but broadly speaking, its popularity is immense.
That really says something about how important people find it.
It really does. Speaks volumes about its perceived power over centuries.
Okay, so let's tackle this word emptiness. Because honestly, when I first heard it in this context, I just thought nothing, like a vacuum, a void.
That's a super common first reaction, and it's probably the biggest hurdle to understanding it. Emptiness, or shunyata in Sanskrit, in Buddhism, it doesn't mean absolute nothingness or non-existence.
Okay, so what does it mean then?
It points to the absence of something specific, inherent existence, or independent existence, or permanent existence. It means things lack what's called svabhava.
Svabhava, inherent existence. So things exist, but not independently, not fixed.
Exactly. Things exist, but they exist contingently, relationally. They depend on causes and conditions. They don't have their own built-in, self-sufficient power or unchanging essence.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about a table. It seems solid, right? Like a distinct thing. But it's made of wood, which came from a tree, which needed sun, soil, water. It was assembled by someone, designed by someone. Its tableness depends entirely on all these other factors and parts. It doesn't have an inherent independent tableness floating around somewhere.
Okay. So its existence is dependent on everything else.
Precisely. Emptiness is the lack of that independent, absolute kind of existence, not the lack of existence altogether.
Okay. That helps clarify it. Now, I often hear the name Nagarjuna connected with emptiness. Who was he?
Right, Nagarjuna. He lived around the 2nd century CE, a hugely influential philosopher. He founded the Madhyamaka school. Yeah, it means middle way. And this school is really key for understanding emptiness as the ultimate nature of reality. They argue that because everything arises co-arising, it must be empty of that inherent existence, that svabhava.
A middle way.
Yeah.
What's it in the middle of?
It's trying to steer between two extremes. One is eternalism, the belief that things have real, permanent essences. The other is nihilism, the belief that nothing exists or matters at all. Madhyamaka says emptiness avoids both by denying inherent existence but affirming dependent existence.
So rejecting svabhava is the core.
Absolutely. Nagarjuna famously put it, we state that conditioned origination is emptiness. Basically, dependent arising is emptiness.
Conditioned origination, dependent arising. Okay, I see the link. But before we delve deeper into that, what about Zen? Does Zen have a different angle on emptiness?
It shares the same fundamental understanding, but Zen often emphasizes, well, direct experience, intuition, less philosophical analysis, perhaps.
More feeling it than thinking it.
Kind of. In Zen, emptiness, called ku, is often described as the ground of being, the source from which all forms arise and return. It's also tied very strongly to realizing the illusion of a fixed, separate self.
So less about proving emptiness, more about realizing it directly.
Exactly. Zen often talks about the falseness of the self-nature we project onto things, and they have concepts like suchness or tathata, the kind of luminous quality of things when you see their empty nature. They use metaphors like the finger pointing at the moon. Don't mistake the explanation for the reality itself. The emphasis is on realization through practice, like zazen, meditation.
Okay, different path, same peak, maybe.
Yeah.
So how does all this help us with form is emptiness, emptiness is form? You mentioned something called the two truths doctrine.
Yes, the two truths. This is absolutely crucial for making sense of the paradox. It basically says there are two valid ways to see reality, conventional truth and ultimate truth.
Conventional and ultimate.
Conventional truth is our everyday world, the world of distinct forms where tables are tables, chairs are chairs, you are you, I am me. Actions have consequences. This is the level we usually operate on.
Right, the practical reality.
Exactly. But then there's ultimate truth. From this perspective, when you analyze deeply, those seemingly solid, separate forms are revealed to be empty of that inherent independent existence we talked about.
So emptiness isn't separate from the forms.
No, that's the key. Emptiness is the true nature of form seen with wisdom. It's not somewhere else. Think of the wave again. Conventionally, it's a wave, distinct from the water around it. Ultimately, it is just water, a temporary manifestation of the ocean. Both are true, just different levels of seeing.
Okay, so form is emptiness, means the ultimate reality of form is its lack of inherent existence.
Precisely.
And emptiness is form means this emptiness isn't just blankness, it's the very potential for forms to appear in our conventional world.
You've got it. Emptiness is the ground, the potentiality from which all conventional forms arise. It's the nature of existence, not the negation of it.
Now, when the sutra says form, does it just mean physical stuff, like the table?
Good question. No, it's much broader. In Buddhism, form, or rupa, is just the first of the 5 skandhas.
Skandhas, what are they?
They're often translated as aggregates or heaps. They're said to make up our entire experience of being a person. So besides form, physical matter, there's vedana, sensations or feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, sajjana, perceptions, recognition, saskara, mental formations, impulses, volitions, and vijnana, consciousness.
Wow. So form here covers our entire inner and outer experience.
Exactly, the whole package. And the Heart Sutra explicitly says this. It doesn't stop at form as emptiness. It continues the same is true of feelings, perceptions, impulses, and consciousness.
So emptiness applies to my thoughts, my feelings, my awareness itself.
Yes, the principle holds for the totality of our experience. Nothing is exempt.
Okay, that really deepens. Now, you mentioned physics earlier. I find those potential connections fascinating. How does emptiness resonate there?
It is fascinating, but we need a disclaimer here, right? These are resonances, parallels, maybe analogies, not scientific proof of Buddhism or saying they are identical concepts.
Understood. Just interesting overlaps.
Right. So one area is quantum field theory, QFT. The idea in QFT is that fundamental reality isn't made of tiny, solid billiard balls. It's fields. And particles, like electrons, are just excitations or vibrations in those fields.
Like ripples on a pond?
Sort of, and this view of matter as excitations in fields rather than inherently solid things resonates quite strongly with the Buddhist idea that forms lack inherent fixed existence. They are more like temporary appearances.
I can see the parallel. What else?
Well, Wave-particle duality, how quantum entities can act like spread-out waves,
Mhm.
potentiality, or localized particles, manifestation, depending on how they're observed, and the constant appearing and disappearing of virtual particles in the quantum vacuum. Some see an analogy there with phenomena arising from and dissolving back into emptiness, which is seen as a field of potential.
And the observer effect, does that
But
connect?
that gets brought up too. The idea in quantum mechanics that the act of measuring a system seems to influence its state. This has been compared, sometimes loosely, sometimes more thoughtfully, to Buddhist ideas, especially from the Yogacara or mind-only school.
Mind only.
Yeah, a school that emphasizes the role of consciousness in constructing our experience of reality. So both quantum physics and this school seem to suggest consciousness isn't just a passive observer, but somehow plays an active role. Again, not saying it's the same mechanism, but the resonance is there.
And interconnectedness, you mentioned that earlier with dependence arising.
Absolutely. Quantum entanglement is a big one here. You have particles linked in a way that measuring one instantly affects the other, no matter how far apart they are in non-locality. It points to a deep, non-obvious connection. And that resonates strongly with dependent origination, the idea that everything is interconnected and interdependent.
So different languages pointing towards a similar view of reality, maybe.
That's a good way to put it. A reality that's less about separate, solid things and more about interconnected processes and potentiality.
You know, thinking about form, including our inner experiences, it brings to mind philosophy. Are there connections there, too, like idealism?
Definitely. Philosophical idealism, the view that reality is fundamentally mental or consciousness-based, has clear parallels. If reality is ultimately mind, then the forms we perceive aren't independent, out-there things, but are tied to consciousness.
Which sounds a lot like that Yogacara mind-only school you mentioned.
Exactly. Yogacara essentially argues that our experience of an external world is inseparable from the mind that experiences it. It doesn't necessarily deny an external world, but says we only ever access it through mind.
And what about phenomenology? That seems relevant, too.
Very much so. Phenomenology focuses precisely on lived experience, on the structures of consciousness as we experience them directly. It tries to describe how things appear to us without getting bogged down in debates about whether there's an independent reality causing those appearances.
Focusing on the experience itself.
Right. And this focus on direct subjective experience aligns beautifully with Buddhist practices like mindfulness. Even the phenomenological method of bracketing, trying to set aside preconceived assumptions about the world, has echoes of Buddhist non-attachment to fixed views.
It feels like there's a theme emerging, that our minds play a big role in constructing the reality we experience.
That's a huge theme. You see it in psychology, too, like with personal construct theory, how we build mental frameworks to interpret the world. Or just the broader cognitive science idea that our brains are actively constructing our perception based on sensory input, memory, expectations.
So that feeling I might have sometimes, that the solidity of things is partly an illusion created by my own experience. It's kind of what these ideas are pointing towards.
In a way, yes. They challenge the naive realism that assumes the world is exactly as it appears to us, independent of our minds.
Okay, let's circle back to that crucial link you mentioned, dependent origination, pratyasamutpada. How does that really tie form and emptiness together?
It's the explanatory mechanism, you could say. Dependent origination is the principle that nothing arises on its own. Everything comes into being based on multiple causes and conditions.
The plant-needing sun, water, soil.
Exactly, and that applies to everything. A thought arises because of preceding thoughts, sensory input, memory, mood, countless conditions. Nothing exists in a vacuum, independently.
So because everything is dependent,
It lacks that inherent independent existence. It lacks svabhava, and that lack is emptiness. So dependent arising reveals emptiness. There are two sides of the same coin.
and emptiness allows for dependent arising.
Precisely. If things had fixed, inherent natures, they couldn't interact, they couldn't change, they couldn't arise or cease. It's because they are empty of inherent existence that they are dynamic, interconnected, and subject to cause and effect. Emptiness is the potentiality that makes the whole show possible.
Like Nagarjuna said,
Yeah.
nothing is not dependent, therefore nothing is not empty.
You got it. That nails
Okay.
the connection.
This feels like it must have really practical implications. It can't just be theory. How does understanding this actually help someone, living their life?
Oh, massively. The practical side is huge. Think about mindfulness practice. When you observe your thoughts and feelings, recognizing their empty nature, that they're temporary, conditioned phenomena, not solid, permanent parts of you, It creates space.
Says.
Yeah, like mental breathing room. You don't have to identify with every thought or be swept away by every emotion. You see them arise, linger, and pass away because they lack inherent substance. This fosters detachment, equanimity.
So if I feel angry, I can see it as anger arising rather than I am angry.
Exactly. You see it as a conditioned mental state, empty of a solid self, and that changes your relationship to it. It reduces clinging and aversion.
And what about attachment?
Yeah.
To stuff, or maybe even to our ideas about ourselves.
Huge impact there, too. If you understand that possessions, status, even your sense of identity are ultimately empty, meaning they lack permanence and inherent self-importance, it naturally loosens the grip of attachment.
It doesn't mean you throw everything away or stop caring, right?
Not at all. It's not about rejection. It's about changing your relationship to things. Less possessiveness, less fear of loss, more freedom. You can still enjoy things, engage with the world, hold responsibilities, but with less clinging, less anxiety tied to them.
And this helps with suffering.
That's the ultimate goal. By understanding the empty, impermanent nature of all experiences, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, we become more resilient. We suffer less when things change because we understand change is inherent. We don't cling so tightly to the pleasant or resist the unpleasant so fiercely. It fosters equanimity.
Seeing things as less solid, less permanent, somehow makes navigating them easier.
It can, yes. It reduces our reactivity. If we know the storm will pass because its nature is impermanent and dependent on conditions, we might weather it with more grace.
It sounds incredibly powerful. But surely there must be criticisms or different ways people look at this. You mentioned nihilism earlier.
Right. That's the most common misunderstanding or critique, that emptiness equals nihilism, meaninglessness, that nothing matters. But Buddhist philosophy strongly argues against that. Emptiness makes change, ethics, compassion, and liberation possible precisely because things aren't fixed. It affirms conventional reality and cause and effect.
So it's potentiality, not negation.
Exactly. And yes, there are different interpretations. Jairav Atwood, for instance, makes an interesting point comparing the Heart Sutra's emptiness to earlier texts that used similes like form is like an illusion. He suggests the shift in terminology might reflect something specific, maybe related to meditative states.
So the understanding might have evolved or shifted emphasis?
It's possible, and different schools definitely have nuances. Theravada might focus more on the emptiness of the self, anatta, while Mahayana extends it explicitly to all phenomena, dharmas. Vajrayana might talk about luminous emptiness. Zen emphasizes that direct realization. The core is similar, but the flavor can differ.
Okay, quite a journey through this concept. If we were to try and boil it down, what's the main takeaway for listeners from our deep dive today?
I'd say the core idea is that form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Is this profound insight that the reality we experience all forms is fundamentally lacking inherent independent existence. It arises dependently. And this emptiness isn't a void, but the very potential for everything to arise and change.
It still feels paradoxical, something you need to mull over.
It absolutely is. It's designed to challenge our usual assumptions. But hopefully, seeing it through the lens of the two truths and connecting it to dependent origination helps make it less baffling. And seeing the resonances with physics or philosophy just shows how fundamental these questions are.
And importantly, it's not just philosophy for the bookshelf.
Definitely not. It has real practical value for cultivating mindfulness, easing attachment, reducing suffering, and finding a wiser way to engage with life. Even with the different interpretations and critiques, its power as a transformative teaching is undeniable for many.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener. How might really taking on board this idea that your experiences, your thoughts, feelings, even your sense of self are impermanent, interconnected, and lack that solid, independent core, how might that shift how you view your day-to-day life? How you relate to challenges or even joys?
Yeah, that's the real question, isn't it? It's an invitation to keep exploring, both intellectually and maybe through your own experience, the nature of reality and the deep wisdom embedded in texts like the Heart Sutra.